Let me begin by saying that I want to thank God for the vision that He has given to the leadership of this church to think in the direction that has led to this conference. You know, many times people say, what is the role of the church in nation building? I remember early year before last, a group of young men came to me and talked about this whole Occupy Nigeria thing during the fuel subsidy crisis. And I told them I would come out and join them. They were surprised. And they were supposed to meet at Falomo. And the idea was to go from Falomo to go and join the people at Emi Park. And we got out that first morning. There were like 9 of us standing in front of Falomo roundabout, I think waiting for this transportation to go to Emi Park. And I said to them, why are we going there? What's wrong with the people who live here? Why don't we wake them up? He said, wake them up. I said, yeah. And we started marching down Awolowo Road. He said, let's go to the governor's house. And first of all, said to him, look, nobody should be sleeping. This is not a matter for... And 9 of us started out walking down Awolowo Road and singing. You know, before we were done coming back from the governor's house, we had 200 people with us. By the 5th day, the Friday, we had more than 10,000 people out there. And Sumis Matkol, the photographer, said to me, do you realize what has happened here? I said, how? He said, if you look in that audience, I can count 4 high court judges. There is a yearning for things to change in Nigeria. Nigeria is simply waiting for leaders who will say, here is the way. And all of these things we think are impossible will become possible. And I know that you are those leaders that this country has been waiting for. And I hope that this encounter will start something in all of us that can lead to this transformation. Let me begin by saying that the youth of Nigeria have always been key to the process of emancipation. The youth and the policy of emancipation in Nigeria. I'll just go quickly from there and move down. If you go back to the colonial experience of Nigeria, which was quite short-lived actually, Nigeria's colonial experience was very short-lived. And it was short-lived because young Nigerians said, we will not continue to be oppressed. And they created groups like the Nigerian Youth Movement, one of the earliest political parties, people like Herbert Macaulay, Nnamdi Azikiwe, and all of those. One thing that is clear about that generation is that they understood very, very well something that Frantz Fanon was to capture very stoutly in his writings, in looking at the wretched of the earth. That every generation had a duty. Every generation must discover its mission and either betray it or fulfill it. And the big challenge for every generation is to discover whether it has betrayed the mission of his generation, or whether it is doing something to fulfill it. My prayer is that we should fulfill the mission of our generation. Because what has challenged Nigeria in recent times is a sense that we have a lost generation that has not managed to find its mission, talk less of either fulfilling it or betraying it, but is betraying it in breach just because it has not essentially discovered its mission. Youth is important in getting things done because young people have passion. Young people are less prone to fear because they really truly have less of a burden on their shoulders. Let me tell you, if you had a group of 50-year-olds and they had to do something risky, their first thought would be next month's school fees. And they don't want to jeopardize paying the school fees next month. A 21-year-old does not think of school fees. So 21-year-old seems to be bolder. This is why this saying that when you are 18, essentially you think with your heart. You see with your heart. Everything is driven by your passion. When you are 40, the head takes over. Which is why it is said that at 18, everyone is a Marxist of sorts. But if at 40 you are still a Marxist, something is wrong with your head. If at 18 you are not a socialist, a welfarist, all of those, something is wrong with your heart. But at 40 you are still a Marxist, something is wrong with your head. And this is the challenge of the life cycle that we all have to go through. This is why young people are so important in the course of building any nation. Most nations have been saved from their errors by their young. When I lived in the United States as a graduate student, a wonderful man called Jimmy Carter was president. And the American economy, unfortunately, was sliding very badly. Inflation went to 29%. Japanese companies began to overtake American companies. And America was beginning to lose its footing. And so that president lost his re-election bid to a man called R.A.G.E, who, as many of us know, is nothing close to being a genius. In fact, there are many who speculate that Alzheimer's was already on when he was in the White House. But he knew how to find the right people who shared his passion to work for him. And one of the things that Ronald Reagan did was excite the youth of America into taking up a challenge of an America that was losing its gait. When I left the United States after my PhD in 1982, America was a country whose young, like the young of Nigeria today, at the end of the academic session, which usually is about April, May, semester ends May. By March, young people were working very seriously on their CVs, waiting for job interviews. And jobs were getting fewer and fewer to find. When I went back to the US 10 years later, after the Reagan era, as April approached, I was on university campuses at Harvard, at American University. Young people were not working on their CVs. They were working on business plans and hoping to be billionaires before their 26th birthday. It is the dot-com passion of that generation that saved the American economy. And those young people like Bill Gates, like Steve Jobs, they were in their 20s then, completely turned around the fortunes of American economy. And this is how societies have been saved all through history. The young save their country. So, why do we live in a country that puts down its young? That is one of the challenges of now for Nigeria, to realize that it is its young that will save it. It is its young that will save it. For many reasons, the young take more risks, as we've discussed. Young people shall see visions. We know. And they see more clearly the possibilities. And it is their future that we have to contend with. Many, many years ago, I was privileged. I started out fairly young. I was invited to a meeting called by Chief Chris Ogumanjo just before the return to civil rule. Nigerian leading statesmen to come and discuss the future. He was in his place in Ijebu in Erumo, his center. As I entered the room, Professor Akim Abugunje saw me and said, "Oh, Pat, thank God you are here." I said, "Oh, what have I done now?" He said, "You know, I was so relieved when I saw you because as I was leaving my home, my son said to me, 'So all of you who are about to die are going to gather to discuss the future that those of us who are still living have.' So when I saw you, I said, 'Thank God, this is one person who is not about to die.'" Unfortunately, many of those people that his children thought were about to die 20 years ago are in the current conference discussing your future. But that is part of the challenge that we need to overcome. Young people, all people live through a cycle. And it is the challenge of this cycle which Stephen Covey likes to describe that I think we need to key into. As infants, we are dependent. Infants, whatever we get, we depend so much on our parents. By the time we are teenagers, we become rebellious. We want to be independent. The age of independence is the age of experimenting, of thinking new ways of doing things, of thinking outside the box, of breaking orthodoxy. And it's truly in breaking orthodoxy that you discover the new ideas that will be tomorrow's great ideas. And then we move into the stage which all people ultimately get to, the stage of interdependence. As young people, as we move through this, we see that we live in a season, as Pastor just quoted from Scripture, of casting down. But I have news for you. It is really, truly a stage of lifting up. People talk about all that is wrong with Nigeria, and I keep pointing many of those things that are wrong out. But I say to people, the prospects for Nigeria have never been greater. And I'm not joking. I believe it. I am not even trying to prophesy. I am talking about the reality that I see. Nigeria is about to take off into the stratosphere. So there are problems. Yes. But where sin abides, grace abides even more. And so the challenge is to take the put-downs of today, convert them into the strength for tomorrow. And that's why the young of this country are very, very critical for our future. Nigeria has what has been described as a youth bulge. Now that youth bulge, and the British Council sponsored a study a couple of years ago, which I was one of the so-called elders council to superintend. They got a group of elders to superintend this process. Research was done, by a group of scholars from Harvard, from University of Ibadan, from a number of places into this, and it was published as the Generation Next study. What economists have found is that yesterday, the population of a country was a limitation. And so they told you about how to control birth, to do these kinds of things. But they look at what is going on. They see a Japan that is dying because it's not having enough young people to produce the growth that will support the aging. And you see countries in the West that are now beginning to use visa lottery and all of that to attract the young, capable from our lands into their place. And economists now talk about a demographic dividend. A demographic dividend. That demographic dividend is the strength of Nigeria. All we need to do is invest appropriately in the education and the wellness of our youth, and we will create an economic machine that cannot be stopped. Our young people have to seize this and not be what people think they are, but be what they know that they must be. That is the challenge of now. So, let's look at how young people have mobilized politically in Nigeria historically. You know, the years shortly before I went to go to school at the University of Nigeria were years of some turbulence, led by a young man called Isaac Adakaboro. Revolutionary young men focusing on certain kinds of rights of minorities. But they were preceded in those kinds of thinking by the young men who fought for independence I talked about earlier, the age of emancipation, young people, the H.O. Davises of this world, the people who led us to independence were in their 20s and 30s when they began this struggle. And then they were swept off power by 20-something-year-old soldiers, head of state 32, and all of those. They ran a country. And my friend Fala Adiola says that one of the tragedies of Nigeria is that men who ran Nigeria at 30 and look at a 50-something-year-old man and say, "You are a young man, my friend, wait for your turn." That is the tragedy of what has happened to Nigeria. And those men in their 80s are still there, trying to tell Nigeria where to go. So these students of emancipation had their impact on how their society was set. And then they began to get older. And they began to see everybody as young. But you know what? You are put down if you allow them to put you down. I want to give a testimony, a personal story in that regard. Because in the days before my time at the University of Nigeria, students changed the course of Nigerian foreign policy by demonstrating against the Anglo-Nigerian Defense Pact. At independence, the government of Balewa, who we just saw, entered into a defense treaty with Britain. And young Nigerian university students in Ibadan came out on the streets of Lagos and Ibadan protesting. One of them is a genteel old man today called Felix Ohiwere. They were student protesters. And that pact was abrogated. At the age of 19, I was an executive of the Students' Union at the University of Nigeria. And Nigeria was engaged in the liberation movements. And Nigeria was called a frontline state. And I said to myself, why should the government of Nigeria make foreign policy decisions without consulting Nigerian students? So I wrote a letter to the foreign minister and said I wanted him to come and debate us on the direction of Nigerian foreign policy in Southern Africa. Of course, I got no reply. So I said, and I got in a Peugeot 404 station wagon, as they used to be in those days, from Nsukka and came to Lagos, the capital of Nigeria, and went to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which was then opposite on Tinubu Street, opposite, is now burnt, the Republic House, the old Republic House, opposite Central Bank. And I got there, I went up, got to the secretary's floor. I wanted to see the foreign minister. Looked at me. You want to see the foreign minister? Yes. Why? I wrote him a letter to come and debate us, and I have not gotten a reply. Looked at me again. He said, okay, you know what? Go back to your university, Send your letter to the Dean of Student Affairs, who will minute on it and send to the Vice Chancellor. Who will? I send it to God. She looked at me and said, look at this precocious boy. Yes, you can send it to anywhere. But let it get. I said, before it gets to the foreign minister, I would have graduated. He said, that's your problem. But you know what I did? I could have given up and gone. I went downstairs. I said to them, when does the foreign minister come to work? The concierge said to me, he should be here already. His advance party has arrived. He was still saying his advance party has arrived when the motor kid pulled up. Boom. And this lanky, young, dashing officer stepped out. Colonel Joseph Nanven Garba, Foreign Minister of Nigeria, who had just announced the coup that brought Murtala Mohammed to power. I said to him, Colonel Garba, I disagree with your position on Angola. He said, who said that? I said, me. He said, why? I began to canvass my position, and we began to argue. I began to quarrel and argue, and walked past his secretary and walked straight into his office. And Colonel Garba started shouting for his advisor, Ambassador Brownson Dede. Where's Brownson? I'm going to go to Nsukka and debate these boys. What do they think? I'm coming. I had won. The date was set for the following year. I think it was the 17th of February 1976. That's when it was to take place. 4 days before, a coup attempt led to the death of the head of state, General Murtala Mohammed. Of course, I didn't know nobody knew what was happening. First of all, the vice chancellor and everybody on campus did not believe that he was coming, that I got any such thing, so they didn't take me seriously. And I thought, oh, this will finally ruin it. And they will say, we knew anyway. Country was still in a state of emergency. You know, phone lines were not working, all kinds of things. I was depressed. But I went to Enugu to try and find out. I went to the division commander's office, but he was looking at me. I went to the governor's office. Then, I think at the cantonment, the commander saw how dejected I was. Said, okay, why don't you just go to the airport? Because, you know, state of emergency, nobody was telling anybody anything. But obviously he knew something. He said, just go to the airport and wait. I went to the airport. It wasn't 30 minutes after I got to the airport, a Nigerian police jet landed. And Joe Garba's brother, who was his ADC, stepped out. And Garba had decided, even in state of emergency, to come and honor my invitation to debate the students of the University of Nigeria. That was when I knew that old men could lie, because when we drove into the campus, the radio had announced his arrival in Enugu. Vice Chancellor began to make arrangements all over the place, cleared the Chancellor's lodge quickly. When we arrived, the Vice Chancellor said, you know, these students, they didn't tell us you were coming. So the point I'm making is that the power is in you. Nobody will give it to you. You have to take it. But we've come through this era of activist, passionate, committed students to a season of a collapse of culture in Nigeria. Culture shapes human progress. And what has happened to us is that there has been a collapse of culture in our country. Values determine what you can become as a people. So, we've gone from those days when students were so completely selfless. I mean, in my time, if something went wrong, before you said something is wrong, we were on the streets protesting it. Now today, you go into a university campus, and the political parties have financed students. People who claim to be student union officials are driving four-wheel drives on campus. In fact, they were due to have graduated 4 years ago, but they're still around. The youth, unfortunately, in this collapse of culture, have allowed themselves to become mercenary mobilizers for crooked politicians. But righteousness exalts a nation, and sin is a reproach. Any people. But you know what? It is only for a season. It's only for a season. In 2006, a group of us, as part of my, if you will, citizen role, in 1993, we had the elections, so-called June 12 elections. I voted in the elections, and it went smoothly, everything. The day after the elections took place, I left to go to the United States to attend the World Convention of the Full Gospel Businessmen's Fellowship, which was in Boston that year. I actually ran into Kola Abiola at the airport. He was going to London, I was going to New York, and I congratulated him because results were clear. I was at the convention in Boston when a Ugandan ran to me and said, you Nigerians, every time we get set to making progress in Africa, you set us back. You Nigerians. I was wondering what he was talking about. But that's how I heard of the annulment of the elections of the 12th of June, 1993. I left and went up back to my room. My spirit shattered. And when anything happens to me, I immediately begin to act. I began to write an article that was titled, We Must Say Never Again. The article was published in The Guardian even before I returned to Nigeria, and became what mobilized what was called the Concerned Professionals. That's how we founded the Concerned Professionals. And we stood up against that moment. You know, people always tell you about fear. They will do this to you. They will do. Yes, of course, I made the list of those the Abacha administration wanted assassinated. People followed me. But you see, they can kill the body, but they cannot kill. That's what matters. And most times, because that God is ever faithful, they don't succeed in even killing the body. Sometimes we fear nothing, and we just allow our possibilities to be crumbled by a few. What has happened to our country is that from those experiences and the battles, we managed, literally speaking, to chase the military away. And many of us thought our jobs were done. Let's now allow these people to come back and do what democracy allows. I still remember standing in front of my office on the Dow Taylor in Victoria Island one day. Small group, Donald Duke, a number of, when we were debating, Donald Duke says, well, you people, you say you don't want politics. We are going to go into politics, so. Because we can't allow these people to do what they like. I was one of those, and I confess publicly, who said, we are businessmen, we are professionals, we have chased the army away, let politicians go. Big mistake. Donald Duke and co. went back, took their states, and for whatever is worth, Cross River States has prospered a lot more because those group of young people have created a different kind of future for that place. That is very, very important. It was a lesson that I learned with pain. The late Waziri Mohammed, who died in the Bellevue crash, remember him saying, look, if we rally the support we have in the country now and take this thing over, we can create a different country. Some people said, they want to use us for politics. By 2006, those of us who said they wanted to use us came to regret what we said. And we said, let's create a group. That's how I became involved in running for public office. But that is a long story for another time. But there were fundamental things that needed to be changed. And we saw a sign of it in what was projected of Balewa. We had a country of committed, passionate, service-oriented, simple men. And Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa was a prime example of that. And the story that was told here is a story I am deeply familiar with. Indeed, something that didn't come out of that story is that he traveled from Lagos to Bauchi by train on second-class ticket. The Prime Minister of Nigeria was going on holidays, used his own money to buy a ticket by rail, second class, to his village, and was caught by a British photojournalist eating sugarcane in a hut where he lived with his children. Dr. Michael Okpara was Premier of Eastern Region. He apportioned GRA in Enugu and did not give himself one plot because it would be unethical for the man who's presiding over something to give himself something. After the Civil War, Dr. Okpara, some people had to get together and build him some kind of house in Umuahia where he lived until he died. He was Premier of all of Eastern Nigeria and was able to drive the economy of Eastern Nigeria to a point where he could boast in 1964 that isolated from the rest of Nigeria, Eastern Nigeria would be the fastest growing economy in the world. And he didn't give himself one plot of land. Leadership is about two things: knowledge and a sense of service. Sacrificial giving of yourself for the good of others. But you know what? People who serve never lack. Ultimately, you are taken care of. Mahatma Gandhi. The CVL has a volume it has published, a coffee table book, Compendium on Leadership. It has people like Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Abraham Lincoln. people who have given sacrificially of themselves ultimately never lack. And so, you ask yourself why self has so taken over in our country. And it's only young people who can change these things. The current culture of power is about me, myself, and I. And that culture will not get us to where we should be going, where we must be going, where we are set to go, and where we must get to. And so a new generation has to reject that. And has to go back to the simplicity of the Balewas. There's a friend of mine, I mentioned his name, Otumba Lawal Sholarin, Tunchi Lawal Sholarin. A couple of years ago, he was in South Africa. And he was sitting at the foyer of Pretoria Sheraton. And he looks up. And there's a man just quietly strutting across the foyer. I said, my goodness. Oh, that's Thabo Mbeki. That's the president of the country. That's the president by himself. He walked across, got across, entered a car, and the car drove away. And he nearly fainted. President of South Africa? I was telling this story to another friend of mine, and he laughed. Dele Olojode. Dele said to me that he, as a journalist living in South Africa, came to interview Mbeki. And Mbeki was apologizing that something has come up. He needs to go to Johannesburg. Does he mind they are talking in the car? He says, oh, why not? So he gets down with the president of South Africa. President of South Africa gets into the car. He joins him in the back seat. There's one security man in front and a driver and one car in front. And they stop at every traffic light. The president of South Africa serving, not former. And so you ask yourself, what's wrong with us? What is wrong with us? They will tell you security. If they know what security means. Anyway, let me move towards a closing around the youth bulge and the challenge that is before us. I have made the point that the youth have the power to see more clearly. Wherever there is a privilege, there is an obligation. Because of the privilege of being able to see more clearly, the youth have a duty, an obligation to play the rescue role for their country. It is a generation that must recognize that there is an abundance in availability. And part of the problem of Nigeria is a scarcity mentality. That scarcity mentality leads us to a win-lose mindset. Have you ever gone to a conference? Somebody has given a speech. You know that 99% of people in that room will never read that speech, but try to distribute paper, ordinary paper, and people will be scrambling. None of them will ever read that paper after that day. There is a scarcity mentality that has gripped us and is keeping us down. But we can think win-win. There is enough in this place for all of us. An abundance mentality is required if the generation next is to claim the promise of Nigeria. I give you a simple example from practical politics. See, Nigeria used to have a situation where local governments were administrative convenience. So in the 60s, there were more local governments in southern Nigeria than in northern Nigeria. In 76, Obasanjo's government introduced local governments into the revenue sharing arrangement, borrowing from Brazil. So revenues could come through local governments. And every powerful young officer in the military pushed for their village to become a local government. At the end of the day, Nigeria got 774 local governments. 500 plus were in northern Nigeria, and the rest in the south. And what Nigerians don't often reflect on is that for a very long time, since 76, a very significant part of our revenues have flowed to northern Nigeria through these local governments. But you know what? Northern Nigeria is poorer today than it was then. Economists call this lottery effect. Have you seen a man who won the lottery? A poor man who won the lottery 10 years after is poorer than he was when he won the lottery. And so We go to that conference now, we're all quarreling and arguing about revenue formula. No, 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 no. The issue that the national conference should be discussing, the Nigerian character. What are the values that define us as a people? These are the things that will make us make progress, not how much revenue we get from the federation account. It is this kind of mindset that will drive things. We're going to be asking ourselves, what are winning values? Our young people, what are winning values? One very important winning value that we are losing is the value of delayed gratification. You sow, you water, and harvest time comes. What we have dominating our thinking is instant gratification. That man has a four-wheel drive, I will buy my own. And so you are eating on the table today, tomorrow you are eating on the floor. The work ethic. You know, I tell people that man was created to work. There are people who misinterpret scripture, in my view, by saying that the fall of man led to his having to eat off the sweat of his forehead. Go to Genesis 2:15, and you will find that man was created to be a co-creator with God, moving creation towards his perfection. So man was made to work. And if you work, you will see the reward. I'm sure most of us here have read Malcolm Gladwell. This Canadian writer who has Nigerian blood, by the way. Malcolm Gladwell. Writes some of the best books around. Tipping Edge, David and Goliath, and all of those. Malcolm Gladwell makes the simple point that most successful people have to put in 10,000 hours of practice or work to reach their level of success. So you see Michael Jackson moving like it's not moving that way just because he was given a talent. It's because he put in 10,000 hours of work before reaching that stage. The work ethic. You cannot make progress when you learn to work. We must learn to do things well. We now have what somebody described as a commune mentality. It doesn't matter, commune. You know, people said of Jesus, Mark 7:37, he has done all things well. Profit comes not because you want to make money, but because you have done things well. If you do things well, whatever it is that you do well, you will ultimately make profit. And you can create a generation that does that. A generation that has respect for the dignity of the human person. We will see where it will take us. Let me begin to close around politics and how we organize politics. I was talking to an INEC commissioner, a friend of mine, just over the weekend. And he made a point that, you know, they went on a delegation to Korea and asked Koreans, you know, all this success you've had, what was responsible for it? They said, because we changed the nature of our politics. They said, how? He said, after independence, they had independence for 1945. And if you read some books, like one I was going to cite when I talked about values, shape human progress, a book that was edited by Huntington and Harrison. The book is titled Culture Matters. You will see that South Korea was exactly at the same stage of development as Ghana in 1957, when Ghana became independent. Nigeria was ahead of those ones. And then suddenly everything we use, Samsung, all our cell phones, everything is coming. Yesterday I was launching a new Samsung copier. Coming from all the new technologies. The West have not come up. What happened that all of this changed in South Korea? The Electoral Commission in South Korea said to our electoral commissioners, it's simple. What used to happen in South Korea was that those who could steal as much money as possible used it to buy their way to power. Politics was a money game. It was a game of rigging and all of those kinds of things. And Koreans, after a point, had had enough and they began to demonstrate against the political system. The military coup came. Then a new code was devised. Ascension to public office will be a matter of who debates the most, the best. And so whether it's local government, councillor, debates, come to the village square, debate each other on your ideas. Gradually, those who couldn't think and talk began to run away. And those who could think began to dominate the space. And South Korea became one of the leading economies of the world. My prayer is that the youth of this country will not allow themselves to be used as thugs to rig, to carry ballot boxes, but to challenge these people and say, two of you, you want to be local government councillors? Sit down, tell us what you will do. And the one that is clearest in his thinking, elect that person. Once we can do that, we are on our way. Finally, to close, I must say that at the heart of all of this is our essence, is the ethic of a Christian. We cannot pretend that everything is okay because somehow we have a small comfort zone. If we do, we have forgotten our basic call as Christians to be salt of the earth and to be light of the world. You must affect the temperature around you. The people who want to change the whole world in one day, don't worry about the whole world. Worry about the space around you. And if all of us here can change the space around us, can become active, can challenge and hold politicians in our neighborhood accountable and ask for the budget, what was done with this, how much was spent there, and organize our friends using our Twitter. I was in Egypt just by accident during the revolution. I went to do some consulting for the R.A.G.E Bank. And after a day's demonstration from Tahrir Square, the concierge at the hotel, when he comes back, he's so proud. He will be showing us the video on his phone with his son on his shoulder as 1 million people are massed saying, it can't go on like this. The youth of this country must send a message to those who have taken advantage and are trying to block their future, that it can't go on like this, and our country will be reborn. Thank you.
We'll be delighted and greatly inspired to talk into the books written by Takuma and Fumi Johnson. Get the best-selling The Secret Black Book of Wealth by Fumi Johnson and start a journey into economic success. Must I Submit is another great book from Fumi Johnson with great insight into the man and wife question. And from Takuma Johnson comes the classic Life Out of the Box, also available as an audiobook.
This telecast has been brought to you through the support of Chain TV partners. For partnership, counseling and further inquiries, contact us at Chain TV, the Capstone Church Without Walls, 360 Murtala Mohammed Way, Yaba, Lagos. You can call us on telephone numbers 0802 318 2030 or 01893 8243. Or you can send an email to capstone_c@yahoo.com or helpdesk@thecapstoneonline.com. You can also visit our website at www.thecapstoneonline.com. Thank you for watching.
Capstone, Church Without Walls.